We're looking forward to an exciting conversation. We've briefed each other and really agree that we want this to be as interactive as possible. We've talked a lot. Yesterday was really interesting. Didi asked the question around who in the room was a philanthropist or a funder. And I think we had about 5 hands go up. And today, Funke asked the question, but perhaps in a different way, asking about the unstructured givers. And almost all hands in the room went up. Allow me to ask a third question. Which one of you, who here in this room, has donated on any crowdfunding platform before? Put your hands up. Okay, so we have almost, I'd say 3/4 of the room raised their hands. So somehow we're seeing that when we think of traditional philanthropy, we shy away from putting our hands up because maybe we think of the Dangotes and the Gates. Then we think of the unstructured. We all have agreed that we as Africans and perhaps as global citizens, we give. And the crowdfunding allows us even more so the opportunity to do this on a daily basis and, may I say, structured way. So to explore this conversation and to really perhaps question how sustainable, how effective, how helpful these innovations are, I have with me people that are working with these innovative crowdfunding platforms, including M-Changa and Give Directly. We have the traditional philanthropists, as represented by the Gates Foundation in the person of Dr. Paulin. And we have someone that is a recipient and perhaps in her space as well, a giver of philanthropy, so able to speak to her own experience working with these various bodies. So, with that in mind, I think, Matt, I'd like to turn to you for the first question. And we talked about traditional philanthropists yesterday not being able to do it alone. You don't have to be Dangote, we're told. You don't have to be Tonya Cole. And at the same time, we also explored the challenge of the disappearing funds, the leaky bucket, and how that's something that really turns philanthropists away. In talking about M-Changa, you used the word efficient and transparent in describing the work and the role that you play. Can you share with us a little bit this context of crowdfunding and how you're solving these very issues that the traditional philanthropists are facing?
Sure, thank you. It's a pleasure to be here. So let me just introduce what M-Changa is. It's a crowdfunding platform built for the Kenyan market. So we're working in a country where people have had a long history of giving in terms of community, medical fundraisers, educational fundraisers, things like that. But there's no platform for this to be visible or public. So take the concept of GoFundMe, where you have to have online access, you have to have credit cards. Put the Kenyan context where they have a huge usage of mobile money, as well as social media is active and there's fundraising culture. And so we create a platform that's mobile friendly and available for Africans to give however much they want towards the causes they believe in. So we're allowing the community to decide where the money should be going, which causes should be funded, and actually to set these up themselves. And we're creating the transparency and the trust behind that. And because we're a for-profit, we cover all of our costs by charging the fundraiser a small fee, and that keeps us sustainable. So any extra funds we have goes simply towards innovating new products and new designs.
Fantastic, thank you, Matt. You used the word sustainable, and very quickly, I would like to come to you. You represent Give Directly, and interestingly enough, this morning, the model, I'm sure you'll present much more eloquently, but ultimately giving money directly, as the name implies. Yet this morning we explored this there was a lot of resistance to what was perhaps termed as an unsustainable way of giving, where you're not teaching a man to fish, where you're perhaps not creating you're not creating a dependency model, but fostering independence. In view of some of those criticisms of a direct given mindset, can you speak a little bit to Give Directly and how you are or are not being sustainable in this environment?
Sure. Thank you. So as mentioned, I lead Give Directly's work in Kenya. And for those of you who don't know Give Directly, We enable donors to give cash directly to poor rural households, currently in Kenya, Rwanda, and Uganda. And we do this systematically, efficiently, and we study this. So we work with whole villages at a time, making mostly large cash grants, equivalent to sort of a year's worth of consumption, so potentially worth about $1,000 for a household, as a one-time grant intervention. And so, of course, the question of sustainability certainly comes up. And what we find here is that, somewhat counterintuitively, that poor people who haven't managed large amounts of money before are still able to make sensible financial decisions and make investments which sustain themselves into the future. Such that when we've studied our work rigorously through randomized controlled trials, if you, after a $1,000 transfer to a household, you come back a year or two later and you find that their incomes are 30% higher. They've still got hundreds of dollars in assets which have been preserved. Their food security outcomes have been improved because along the way they've been spending more on food, they've been spending more on education, and their stress levels are lower. So what you find actually, and we work in Western Kenya in fishing communities, is that we're giving these fishermen cash, and they're not just spending it immediately on food, they're spending it on nets, on boats, on an engine for a boat. And what you're finding is that actually these are people who are cash constrained or credit constrained, and they don't have access to get money for investment. And so just getting that money can have a really, really transformative impact. So when we think about sustainability, what we see from our evidence is that actually cash can be a powerful one-time intervention. But also, we think about sustainability in that the amount of money in the international development sector is large. And so one way to think about it is that if we can show really effective work such that the existing resources are used more efficiently, then actually that's a way to get more impact just for the existing resources in the space.
Thank you, Mark. Can I push you just a little bit on that? You have impacted, from my research, 50,000 families. I presume that's $50,000 that have been dispersed in Kenya. Is this 50 million? Fantastic. You have in Africa, from 2012 World Bank statistics, about over 300 million under the poverty line. Traditional philanthropists deal in the system level because there's that hope to have large-scale impact that is needed. How, in speaking to sustainability, and given 50 million is actually a lot more significant than 50,000, but how do you see yourself truly solving this massive challenge that we have on the continent? You're in Kenya right now, but the continent is 54 countries. What is the scope and your ability to continue the work in the level that is needed?
So I think there's two parts to that. I mean, one is just if we talk about people being below the poverty line, so the number of people living in extreme poverty, sort of under $1.90 per day, and we think about the total aid going, it's I think it's about $130 billion per year. We have enough money if we could just target it to the poor people, to lift people out of extreme poverty. Obviously, that's not enough to give them a sustainable amount there, but we do know that the money already going in would be enough to lift people out of extreme poverty. So if the money is already there, then there is a question about efficient allocation. I think in terms of give directly, though, the way we think about this, I really liked what Her Excellency Toyin Saraki said yesterday, where she was talking about how she's aiming to show an example which others can pick up and lead. And I think we've seen that quite a lot with cash programs. In Kenya, for example, there's a major hunger safety net program, which is a social protection program. And that came from Oxfam doing a relatively small pilot, which led the government to see that, wow, this is actually something we should pick up. And actually now that's something reaching hundreds of thousands of people every month. And so I think similarly with Give Directly's work, what we would hope to see is that if we can prove this as a model, then what we can see is that some of the existing resources in the space can change that. And so I think the opportunity for philanthropists is to achieve impact in the short term, but also change some of the narratives, and change some of the narratives around respect for the poor, around sort of giving the poor the dignity to really decide what they want to spend the money on and what they see as the most important thing for their needs, and also change the way that some of the big players and the big flows of resources are happening.
Wonderful. So this is my cue to turn to you, Dr. Paulin, to change the ways that the big players are thinking about it. You represent the traditional philanthropist, the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. And at the same time, you know, we are talking about the innovations, democratization of philanthropy. How are you as a traditional philanthropy taking advantage of some of these innovations that exist so that you can better achieve your mission of reaching the world's poorest and in the most efficient manner?
Thank you very much. And thanks for having me here. It's a great honor to be here. It's my first time at this forum. Amazing group of people and the work that you are doing. So one thing I would say is that the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, as my colleague Moki said yesterday, when you look at the 40 billion that Bill and Melinda have invested across most of the issues that we support, a significant amount of that money ended up in Africa. And if I could probably categorize the area where we invest, I would say in 4 areas, right? So the first one is really to ensure that the young kids and the children really survive and thrive. And we, disproportionately invest in health, around maternal child health, nutrition, and supporting several countries across Africa build stronger health systems. And the second one I would say is really to ensure that women and girls specifically really are supported to transform their own lives, through several interventions across health, agriculture development, and financial inclusion, etc. So we do have several programs across, financial inclusion, agriculture, all that. And then the third, which is quite a big, large of our investment, is across, really fighting infectious disease that disproportionately affect the poor, like fighting polio, eradicating polio, HIV, malaria, and all the vaccine-preventable diseases, etc. And then the fourth area, I would say, it really links very well with the topic that we're discussing today, is really to inspire people to transform their communities. So we do a lot of work around what we call the global policy and advocacy, around really creating global good around data, so that we can connect people who are doing philanthropy, people who want to give, to the people in need, down to the communities, by providing good data. As you know, many people want to give, but a lot of questions that people are asking is, to whom I give, and how do I give, and how do I set goals, and how do I track that my goals are having, clear, I'm getting there in terms of target, right? So we, as the Gates Foundation, we really try to provide that global good in terms of data, capacity, building local institutions. This is even how we have made significant decisions now to change the way we do business in Africa. So we do currently have 3 offices in Africa, in South Africa, Ethiopia, and Nigeria. And we are really getting closer to our grantees, closer to the government, signing a lot of MOUs, even like in Nigeria, with the federal government, with different states, so that we can bring all our support together to make sure that we can really partner with local institutions to really move the needle and build sustainable institutions, etc. So happy to
Wonderful.
To discuss more.
So you say that a challenge is connecting those who want to give to those who need. But it might seem there's also the challenge of connecting those who need to those who want to give. And here I'm thinking to Kudo's point earlier about the difficulty of the grassroots initiatives to access the big grants makers, the big organizations, the big foundations. Can you speak to how you're solving for that, given that the need is so large and the potential, the possibilities that exist, endless?
So one thing that we are really shifting our strategy toward investing in Africa. We are looking at African institutions to really partner with them. In the past, it was quite difficult for local institutions to get grants from the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, because we were known, and we're still known, by making big bets, like partnering with the Global Fund, with Gavi, with quite global initiatives, so that we can really have global impact, right? So, but now we've realized that it's really important at the same time to partner with local institutions to build their capacity, to provide them that credibility, because we do have a lot of due diligence that we do, and we also provide, as our colleague from the Ford Foundation, they said it today, like really, money that can help institutions to build their own capacity without linking that necessarily to the impact. Because the big challenge that most institutions have is that when you get 1 million or 2 million, you need to show how your million is really impacting the poor, how you are increasing coverage of specific interventions. But now we are also doing a lot of effort really to select few very good institutions and then build their capacity so that they can be credible, and also they can partner with others, they can raise more money from other donors as well to sustain their impact.
I'm going to stay with you still. Oh no, yes. So let's say Give Directly is saying we want people to learn from us, and they're telling you that this works, giving this person money directly to the poor. Is this something that the Gates Foundation could explore or is interested in exploring? Or what is your take on giving directly?
As I said, we have, so Bill and Melinda started the Giving Pledge, as you know, in 2010, I think, with, 40 people from the US. But today we have more than 170 people across 21 countries. But all are those, some of them are in this room as well. And it's a social contract. They've accepted to give most of their wealth to the development causes, right? But then from there, we also support a lot of individual givers. The good news is that many people come to us to really get, because we have many grantees. Only in Nigeria we have 167 active investments, more than 100 partners. Some of them are in this room. So they come to us to ask, what are the ideas? What are the great partners that are out there that we can partner with, right? So what we do, we try really to send that message, to spread the message, and to make sure that we also support, initiative like M-Changa. So we are supporting that platform to make sure that there are platforms out there, etc. Yeah.
Fantastic. That's what I wanted to hear. How you're relating to, thank you, the democratization of philanthropy, and you are supporting those that are doing that work as well, crowdfunding platforms, what have you. Thank you. Over to you now, Tendai. You are working with Atrium Africa? Did I say that right? Atrium. Triumph Africa, excuse me, I knew I got it wrong. Triumph Africa, working in the space of ageism. And to do this work, you rely a lot on funds from philanthropic organizations, perhaps more than anything in the innovative platforms via crowdfunding, more than anything on crowdfunding platforms, I should say. So can you speak a little bit to your experience as an end user with crowdfunding platforms, some challenges you might have had, and at the same time, some recommendations you have on how we can improve in this space of democratization of philanthropy?
Okay. First of all, I'd like to thank the APF board for the invitation. I think this is a great event, and I've learned so much, so thank you. So I work for an organization, I run an organization called Triumph Africa, and as you said, we're in the space where we are dealing with ageism and raising awareness that we not only need to invest in our youth, but we also need to invest in older people. By 2050, there will be 200 million people over the age of 60. Currently, they are 50 million. The largest growth spurt is expected from 2040. So we have 13 years to get ready, basically. We need to start getting ready now. In terms of how we use crowdfunding, we have used crowdfunding, but to be honest with you, it doesn't form the bulk of the funds that support us. It forms probably less than 5%. And we do have traditional philanthropists and corporate organizations that help fund our work and strategic partnerships. But in terms of how we use crowdfunding and being a recipient of that, we found that to be very helpful for short-term projects rather than long-term projects. So for example, what we do is we run day centers in Zimbabwe and Sierra Leone. And some of the old people's homes who need activities for older people use our day centers. And we find that sometimes these old people's homes don't have blankets, for example. And that's a good project for us to use crowdfunding for, rather than something that is rather than something that we have to deliver regularly. So we use that for short-term projects and sort of immediate needs that we come across within the community. So in that sense, that's very good. I'd like to say, though, that outside the crowdfunding platforms, another thing that we've been experiencing is giving, communal giving. And I'd like to just comment that crowdfunding might be new to the rest of the world. It's not new to Africa. We've always been crowdfunding. We now have platforms that can make it easier for us to connect and to collaborate and to do that. Secondly, communal giving is still continuing. I am part of a community in the diaspora with about 8,000 women in one group, 20,000 women in another group. And what happens is a need comes up, or we recognize an organization that someone who's part of that community raises awareness about their need. And of these 20,000 women or 8,000 women, each give £1 or £2, and that's a lot of money for some organizations that we support. In addition to that, we have a growing number of professionals in the diaspora, African professionals, who are forming giving circles that also contribute to the work that's being done on the African continent.
Wonderful, thank you, Tendai. Crowdfunding is not new to Africa. We've always been doing it, but the only difference is that there's a platform. Matt, you represent M-Changa, which is a platform using mobile money, very effective in Kenya. But at the same time, some criticisms abound. You need I'll speak to the general one. I'm not sure if, let's say for GoFundMe, etc., the ones that we know on the international platform that many Africans depend on. You need a smartphone or a computer, a credit card access, payment recipient access in some ways that might not be that easy. Language, it needs to communicate, an ability to communicate your needs in a way that would influence the giver, so a command of storytelling, of language. And perhaps more often than not, you find that those that are asking for these funds are in the urban area, not your rural farmer or average woman that might be in need of some little funds for her business in the rural area. This is quite critical that we can reach everybody, especially for an effective space as you've described it, where the money can go a long way. Can you speak to some of these challenges that this platform is facing and how we can overcome it so that we can actually truly take advantage of a democratized philanthropy in Africa?
Sure. So one of the greatest challenges we face is the lack of sensitization to such technology on the region. I think Kenya is one of the best placed for it. That's where we started. But of course, the biggest traction is in Nairobi, in the capital city, where people are more sensitized to the technology. And so we rely heavily on our partners and people to go out into these communities to explain how the product works and to use it. So that's why we're grateful for Gates and other organizations which are helping us in this space. We're testing on match funding to make it much more effective when they start a fundraiser. And really, our expansion efforts are not coming from us. We're focusing on building the tools and focusing on what the users need. We rely on other people, foundations, sponsors, to help us get that message out and to get it used. Just to give an example, though, there's this young girl, 9 years old, from a rural village in Kenya. She's diagnosed with a severe skin condition, and her family have no way to pay the bills. So they start a fundraiser on M-Changa and they put it online through whatever channels they have. It gets picked up by an influencer. It goes across, it gets viral in Kenya, and they raise over $50,000 from 10,000 people. And this is money from within Kenya in as small amounts as like $5. And so we see the impact there. We don't have to rely on funding coming from outside. The need is there, the opportunity to give is there. And so the platform is the start of this movement of Africa sustaining itself and solving its need through the community. So.
Beautiful. And Matt, I know one of the reasons M-Changa works so well is because of M-Pesa, mobile money, the ease of giving, because you have solved one part of the challenge. Can you speak to the opportunities that exist in the rest of the continent where there might not be mobile money, and how you plan to your sort of expansion goals, strategy in addressing the need across the continent?
So I'd say without that infrastructure being there, it's pretty impossible to do exactly what we're doing. But there is initiatives like Kiva who fundraise for money outside using crowdfunding and bring it in through partners, through microfinance institutions. So that's one way. And the second part of the question?
I suppose you've answered that question, that it's almost impossible if you don't have a mobile money platform.
But I would say it is up and coming across the region. Mobile money is being taken in different countries. We look at expansion into Tanzania, maybe into Ghana. Wherever mobile money is and social media is being used is a potential market. And just to look at the technology that is around, I can't speak for other countries because I know Kenya, but if you know your country well, look at what could be an alternative to cash and how to manage that.
And I know you have an extensive crowdfunding experience beyond M-Changa, which is only in Kenya. Let's say someone in Nigeria is using GoFundMe, someone in Ghana. Can you speak a little bit to your experience of the opportunities, challenges that exist for these international platforms to be efficient here on the continent?
So the greatest challenge across any financial product, particularly crowdfunding, is trust. So the platform is an intermediary between the people with money and the people who need the money. And if you don't build that trust, I'll give an example of MyC4. They were doing something similar to Kiva, funding entrepreneurs, and then they were taken in by fraud, and they've been in the courts for the last 3 or 4 years now. So these platforms can't exist if there's not an element of trust, which requires transparency. It requires the stories to be told in an effective way and to know exactly where the money's going. So I'd say it's about the authenticity of the projects being raised, the due diligence that goes behind that. So I know M-Changa, we put a lot of our time and resources just in making sure the money is going to the need to be met. Like, we'll send it directly to the bank account of the hospital rather than to the individual. So we take measures to make sure we're as transparent to our funders as possible and that our fundraisers are vetted. But it's an expensive process and it's something that needs a much more investment.
Fantastic. A last question for you. You're both in Kenya. I would come to you, but I realize it might be good for us to have an objective opinion of Give Directly. You're functioning in the same country. He's outlined the beautiful advantages and the ways that it works. What is your experience with Give Directly compared to crowdfunding in Kenya?
I think it's a similar aspect, but a very different market. So we're looking at Kenyan fundraisers who have identified their own needs and spending that for the need that's right in front of them and fundraising from the people around them and hopefully picking up elsewhere. Whereas Give Directly, it's money coming from outside to not necessarily a need that already exists, but an extra boost that's going to help them to improve their quality of life. So I'd say both are serving the same purpose, both are effective, but it's a completely different source of funds and a different audience.
I see you nodding your head, Dr. Paulin. Do you have an opinion here? I would like to hear it, please.
I think let me remove my Gate hat, just put my African hat on. So I'm from Rwanda. Before joining the Gate Foundation, I was working at the School of Public Health. And I was a professor at the university, writing grants, and I was struck by the fact that, sometimes our grant will not be successful, but then the grant will be given to a US-based institution, and we will be a sub-grantee, and we will be told exactly what to do. And we will do most of the work at the School of Public Health, and then we'll have to give our database to someone, and then we'll be part of the publication. And then I started really thinking about it. I was like, what are we doing wrong, right? And then, you know, slowly, like my first program officer was here in the room, you know, from the Rockefeller Foundation. So she came one day and we sat and we started discussing about how can we, as Africans with African institutions, try to really understand the debate that happened in Seattle, in Geneva, in Washington, and start talking that language. And most of the time is because we really don't, you know, take ourselves seriously. Let me, as an African, I'd say that, because when I joined the Gates Foundation, I was really advocating for giving more grant to indigenous African organizations. Then my colleague will say, okay, perfect, let's open the opportunities. We open the opportunities. When the grant application comes, they say, okay, Paulin, now compare. Look at this grant from organization X in country Africa X, and then look at the other ones, right? When you look at the grant, I know we need capacity, etc., but the problem is not the quality only, but the real problem is that when you look at the board of directors, when you deep a little bit, you understand that the board is the sister of the cousin of the person who is in charge, and you know the results are not clear. It's very difficult to really link, you know, because we are all intermediaries between, you know, Bill, Melinda, and Warren Buffett, and the poorest people in need. You know, between, you know, the great donors here with the people in need, right? So we need to make sure that we are responsible middle managers, right? So that we can really translate that in clear numbers and ways that we will be reaching the poor. So if your grant application does not show that, then you are not going to get a grant. So the crowdfunding, the problem is that now it's becoming a little bit complex because now we have many individual people who are giving, right? Yeah. And they need to see exactly how their money are going to reach the poorest people. So we need to convince them. We need to really have very strong argument with numbers, with data, the way we act, so that it can give a lot of credibility. This is what, as African, we need really to create, that credibility that we really care for our people. We show it, and then we can get more money. Yeah. And we can get more money.
Indeed, the need to create credibility. Speaking as Africans still, can we stay on that tone? Tendai, I'm turning to you now. How effective is this new wave of democratization of philanthropy in solving for Africa's issues?
How effective? I think it is very effective. Like Dr. Paulin was saying, it is effective in the sense that it's aiding that transparency. And that transparency is what we need more of. However, my concern is about how we are telling the stories on these platforms. And one thing that I'd like to say is, as Africans, we are not what has happened to us. We are not Ebola, we are not HIV/AIDS. So when we tell these stories, we must make sure that we are accountable and preserving the dignity of the people that we are helping. And so when these... And when we do that, I think we can also help to challenge some stigmas. I also wanted to just add something, which I know is slightly off topic, but I think goes to the democratization of philanthropy in terms of giving access to more people to participate in helping people in need. I lost both my parents to HIV/AIDS, not cancer, like some people would like to call it, but AIDS, and that's okay. When they passed away, my mom left her estate in trust so that we could do this work. How many of us in here have a life insurance policy? And you can gift part of that life insurance policy towards making Africa a better place, so that we're not raising $5 at a time, but we're raising 10,000, 20,000, 30,000, 40,000.
What I'm hearing you say is more can be done.
Yes, more can be done.
More can be done. And to you, Mark, I know while you represent Give Directly, you're very familiar with many innovations in the system. I think today or yesterday, someone mentioned the role of return on investments, for example, as an alternative. Can you speak to other innovations under this topic of democratization of philanthropy and how we can do more?
I guess when I think about the democratization of philanthropy, it's obviously a very broad topic. Some of it is this question of who gives, and there's been a lot of discussion about that. The other bit is this question of who controls how the resources are being used. And clearly one part of that is at the level of foundations and at the level of, big implementers versus small implementers. For me, I think one of the most exciting pieces is how the resources are being controlled at the community level. And obviously Give Directly is sort of pushing an extreme in some level in really saying that the resources are controlled at the very household level, and that the family should be the one deciding how those resources are used. But I've seen a lot of other various steps along that way. One example, Concern have been implementing, I think mostly with DFID funding, but a resilience program in parts of Somalia, where they as an implementer were saying, well, there are certain things we can do. We can do boreholes, we can do other things, we can do whatever else. And that the community would pick which intervention, and that if the community didn't like any of those interventions, then the default was it would go as cash. But so I really like this idea of, are there ways in which the organizations we're working with are actually going to the communities or even to the actual individuals and saying, with the resources available to you, with the things we're offering, is that actually what you want? Is that actually effective? Is that actually sort of what you would spend the money on given the choice? And obviously there's many different ways of approaching that, but how can we all be giving control to the actual recipients to decide how these, it's philanthropy, we're supposed to be helping them. You need to ask people and give them some control of how they want to be helped.
Fantastic. It sounds like you have something to add.
Yes, I just wanted to agree with you that it is important that we do when we're talking about the democratization of philanthropy, that it's not just on the benefactor end, it's also on the beneficiary end and controlling how those resources are being used. For example, engaging and working alongside traditional leadership and using and leveraging that to understand what the needs are. We've been talking about moving away from sort of isolated giving. I think our traditional leadership are well placed to understand the needs of the community and to help us collaborate and harness things like crowdfunding to make sure that our communities are benefiting and then the decisions are being made or including that leadership to help decide where the resources go.
On that wonderful note, we turn it over to you. The questions that you have to our panelists on all the topics that have been raised around this topic of democratization of philanthropy. Is it helping or is it harming? Do raise your hands if you have a question. Walk up to the mic. We have 20 minutes together. Not all hands at once.
Really quick question. That may be the guys telling me to sit back down. I was just going to ask you all, I had to step out for a second, so maybe did everyone define democracy? Because as we were talking, I actually wondered if we even know or understand what democracy looks like or is.
To ask a clarification question, democracy in the political landscape or in the philanthropy? In this setting, okay. May I just speak to this again, because this was my job and I apologize. Yes, it's crowdfunding. It's about the ownership in every hand so that you can contribute and be a philanthropist yourself. But I definitely would leave the floor to the panelists to speak to for any additions.
Yeah, I think it is about access and more people participating in philanthropy. But I would argue that it is not only that it is also what happened in the 1960s in America. I think somebody mentioned it earlier, where it's also that move to include the beneficiaries as part of the decision of where those resources end up and how they're deployed. So I think democratization of philanthropy is a really big topic, because you could then go into then what is philanthropy? Are we talking about charity, or are we talking about, so I think it's a big topic, but I would narrow it down to that for simplicity.
Hello. Good morning. My name is Nana, and I am here from the African Development Bank. And my question has to do with due diligence on the givers. Our institution has toyed with the idea of partnering with crowdfunding or other organizations to respond to emergencies that may come up that are not obviously part of our work program. For example, this year there was the famine in the Horn of Africa, obviously the mudslides in Sierra Leone. But one of the issues that has come up in the conversation, particularly with our legal department, is what is the traceability of where the money is coming from, and to what extent do the organizations that we might partner with do due diligence on the people giving, to avoid situations where it could be from nefarious sources and they're just using it to offload it on someone.
Take
Morning,
another.
or is it afternoon?
Yes.
It's afternoon. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Goni. I'm with High Life Foundation and the communications team. My question is, My question is linked to how effective storytelling can help with the democratization of philanthropy. Yesterday we had heated debate on how philanthropists can better tell their story so that we get more people engaged, we get more people involved. So how does storytelling and how relevant is it to the democratization of philanthropy?
Perfect. Who would like to go first?
Sure.
Yeah.
So, to answer the due diligence question, in Kenya, we're very limited in what information we can collect on the giver. If they pay by mobile money, we literally have their phone number and their name. So, apart from having a blacklist and scanning credit cards, there's very little we can do because of the limited infrastructure. When it comes to credit card, we have to be very intentional about fraud prevention and money laundering. So we do actually call the person on the other end who's paid by credit card or PayPal to check they have a relationship with the donor, with the fundraiser, and we make that connection clear. So that's an extra cost that we have to go through, but it is important that we are doing the due diligence on both the lender and the fundraiser.
And how often do you get it wrong?
I don't have an answer to that.
We think about the due diligence usually on the side of the recipient, and especially, as an organization that's registered in the US, around making sure, this sort of fear that, is the money you're giving going to be funding terror, sort of in a worst case. And so we obviously think about where we're going to be working in light of that, and that's led us to be a bit more cautious about where we're working than otherwise, but also running all the names against relevant lists from the UN and other organizations to make sure that we're not funding someone where we're going to find that that's a problem down the line. Obviously that does create challenges. With the drought in the Horn of Africa, that it's sort of a great example where you go to Somalia and you start running name checks, and you sort of would be getting false positives with half the names. And I think that's ultimately, on this as a room of a lot of people thinking as funders and givers, the response has been, at least in Somalia, of funders, including the big institutions, the EU, DFID and so on, just being a bit more flexible about it and being open to the idea of saying, well, we'd love to run all the names individually, but better for us just to assume that a bit of money is going to be lost, but we're going to prevent 250,000 people dying of famine. And I think we think about that as well, which is we could add a lot of verification processes where we check that every shilling that we give out is spent on something good. But sort of a bit like, the story in the US is sort of the amount of money that's spent on drug tests for welfare recipients, and they spend sort of hundreds of millions on drug tests and find sort of one person. And I mean, I think it's sort of a similar story here where we really find that let's make sure that if we're doing all of these checks, that it's because there's an actual need to do it. And we're not just sort of wasting money on checks which aren't actually adding any value because of a sort of a moral judgment of the recipient or not trusting the beneficiaries.
So on the storytelling, I would say that so the Gate Foundation, partner with several institutions to just amplify the impact of storytelling, especially using social media. You know all about the Giving Tuesday, the Red Nose Day, or even several partnership with Google, Facebook. During the Ebola crisis, Facebook gave the opportunity to its 1.2 billion users to donate to 3 big organizations that are supporting the Ebola crisis, etc. Same like Google, when they really allowed, they provided $2 a bonus to every dollar given to fight Ebola, etc. And then we amplify those stories through social media with different of our partners. And all that really, give an opportunity to every individual to tell his own story, how they relate to the cause that they're supporting, etc.
On the storytelling, I just wanted to say something. It's important for us to get consent. And I know this may be controversial, but in the United Kingdom where we're based, if you're dealing with vulnerable adults or vulnerable children, you cannot put their information out there. And I think as Africans, we need to be responsible about how we're telling the stories and making sure that we also have consent. So what we do as Triumph Africa, before we publish the photographs of anybody, is we ask them very simply, and sometimes we have to put it this way, would you like to be in the newspaper? And not Facebook, and often they say no. And that's no to Facebook as well. I think we just need to take responsibility in terms of how we are telling that story and making sure that where possible, if it's a story about a specific person, that we have consent from that person.
Maybe just to add one piece on the storytelling, and I completely agree on the point around consent. One of the things that we've been thinking about, I think as an organization founded by economists with a very strong focus on data and efficiency, but also recognizing really the power of storytelling, is since last year we've developed a platform called GD Live, where for all of the recipients who consent, we systematically gather, we ask them a couple of questions during the survey process, which goes straight to an online feed, which is sort of on our website. And so there's more than 10,000 individuals where you can see these pieces there, sort of live.givedirectly.org. And there's questions there like, what's the happiest part of your day? What are some of the dreams that you have? This money you're getting, what do you want to spend it on? Afterwards, what did you spend it on? These types of things. And I think especially when we're engaging with philanthropists, we want to recognize that, especially if you're giving to many different people, you're not going to have an opportunity to see all the stories. And we also don't want philanthropists to feel like the stories of what they're supporting are just being cherry-picked. We didn't just pick sort of one one child and decide to sort of represent a whole program when it's there. So more thinking about how can we systematically gather stories in the words of recipients without editing from us, without being run through a comms team or anything like that, so that really the recipients of philanthropy get to tell their stories. And sometimes they say, the Give Directly staff person was rude to me, but that's part of the story. Sometimes they say, I don't think you should have given to my neighbor, they're not such a great person. And it's sort of allowing that stories and transparency to be a part of it, so that really givers can get to decide if they feel like their resources are being used in an effective way, in the words of the people who actually use them.
Thank you, Mark. Caitlin, you have a question?
Hi, my name is Katia, and thank you for your insights so far. My question has to do with incentives for giving, especially for those of you that have platforms or running platforms. What are we doing to help countries in Africa specifically get it right when it comes to taxation, tax relief for giving? Are any of you advocating for that? Or do you already have structures in the countries that you're working in? And for the big donor organization on the panel, is any of your work focused on that for the African continent in trying to get tax benefits for giving so that more people are encouraged to give?
Yes.
Sure. So on M-Changa, we do have a non-profit in America, and we do allow for tax benefits, but to date, it's hardly been used. So people are not using the opportunity, largely because most of our base is within Kenya, and the governments haven't supported such a thing. But more broadly on the incentives of giving, I want to bring up Kiva. I was working there in America, and an entrepreneur can get a $10,000 loan and pay 0% interest on it because it's been crowdfunded, and the interest you would have paid has been covered by donations from the crowd. And I don't know how many of you, if I asked you, would you give your donations back to your donors? How many would say yes? But Kiva actually returns that money, that $25 you've lent, back to you as a giver so that you can reinvest it or take it out. So there is other models of philanthropy, including social lending, that can be applied. And right now they don't exist in Africa, but look at other crowdfunding platforms. You have reward, you have debt, you have equity, and it's a way to give, it's a way to promote entrepreneurship, job creation. And so there's much further to go in the area of crowdfunding and offering incentives for people to give rather than the traditional means of buying something for this community.
Thank you for the question. This is a really important question. I think broadly in the US, for example, we've really benefited a lot from this tax break because it just incentivized many individual donors to just give for causes. Even at the Gates Foundation, we have the 3-to-1 matching, and most of the time when we as employee of the Gates Foundation want to support institutions in Africa, unfortunately we have to give to a US-based institution, and then they will give to the Africa-based institution. But we are still working on kind of like how to get that benefit across Africa. But this is not something that the Gates Foundation will take on ourselves because we are part of the broader community of philanthropy and different foundations. This is as we strengthen our presence in Africa, as we continue to build strong partnership with governments. Like now we do have an MOU with the government of Nigeria with a country presence here. Same in Ethiopia, same in South Africa. Even though we have investment across 45 countries in Africa, but that needs a lot more of engagement, etc. to first of all understand how our investment and the grantee that we are supporting can benefit from those tax breaks, but also to think about expanding that to overall individual givers. It will take some time, and this is a partnership that we'll have to take with other philanthropies, etc. But great point. But on a micro level, what we are doing with few countries in Africa is really to try to support government raise more money from their taxes. This is from our global policy and advocacy work, because we just need the government across Africa to strengthen their capacity to raise more taxes. Because as you all know, in Africa today, the big challenge is really to raise more money so that they can put more money into the social program that we are supporting.
I don't know for other countries. I mean, in Kenya, unfortunately, there's a good new NGO Act revising the prior one, which has implementation's been delayed basically because it would give NGOs a bit more freedom, and the government really wants to sort of control them especially closely for political reasons. But I think it's a really good point. I think we'd love to see it. We'd love to see it happen, and we definitely want to take advantage of it as soon as it does happen.
Okay. We have only 2 minutes left, so just enough time perhaps to give you, the panelists, the last words, maybe very few words, the way forward in the topic of democratization of philanthropy. Is it helping or hurting?
Sure, so I want you to look at crowdfunding in the West and see it's a multi-billion-dollar industry. It's not a charity, it's something that creates revenue and brings money to the need. And so I want that same picture to be across Africa. I want the continent to look at the technology, the infrastructure, the regulation, and build the right resources to enable such platforms to exist and get the money from within and outside of Africa where it needs to be.
And from the Gates Foundation, even though we spend a lot of money, but the need is just huge. And our own money is very, very little compared to the need. So we really strive to make sure that our funding is catalytic so that we can really, be part of that democratization of philanthropy, so that we can bring both small philanthropy, individual philanthropy, to create something that we strongly believe in now, which is really, joint outcome and joint accountability. So we are really moving away from attribution of our dollars to improve outcome, but we are really moving toward contribution so that, the government and people at the community can really own, the sustainability of the programs.
So, I would encourage everyone to think about if there's a role, and if they're thinking about the role and power of cash grants and cash transfers within the work that they're doing, even if, nothing to do with Give Directly at all. And what I mean by that is, I think it's good for us all to ask this question of whether the interventions we're funding are achieving more than that cash would just achieve in the hands of the beneficiaries. And another way to think about that is when you make investments, if you're going to pay a fund manager, then you expect them to achieve better returns than if you just invested the money in a market tracker. Because if they're working hard, they should be doing more than just, benefiting when the tides rise for everyone. So I would encourage all of us as philanthropists and also as people running programs to ask us this question of whether what we're spending the money on is actually achieving more benefit for the people we're trying to help than if we just gave them those resources to decide how to use themselves.
I would encourage everybody to participate and to say, wherever you are, whether you want to call it charity or philanthropy, give what you can. And let us harness technology to make our impact greater. So let's collaborate more, let's give more and collaborate more, and we can do more.
You've heard the panelists. The need is quite significant, and we cannot go the distance alone. Collaboration, collaboration, collaboration. Those words have been coming up again and again in all the panels. And the proverb sits outside for us all to see. To go fast, you go alone, and to go far, we must go together. And in going far, there are different models that are working already that we can explore, that we can share, and we are sharing here together with you all. Thanks for your questions, thanks for your time, and please, a round of applause to our panelists.